Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. ChatGPT is the latest tech sensation, or maybe tech isn't the exact right word, but we'll get into that here in just a second. If you don't know, ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence tool that can converse and create readable text like essays or stories, and it can even produce images and videos. It is completely free for anyone to use, and millions have already done so since it first launched back in late November. Though, to be fair, most people are using it to joke around by asking ChatGPT to write joking songs or poems. But it is also a very innovative tool with a lot of promise and also the potential for many pitfalls as well. So, for a bit more about ChatGPT, what it means for now and the future, we are now joined by Hamed Saremi, an assistant professor at the Computer Information Systems Department at Colorado State University. Hamed, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here today.
Oh, hi, Chris. Thank you very much for having me. It's very nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So first of all, I guess the main question when it comes to ChatGPT, what is it and how does it work?
So ChatGPT is an AI-based chatbot, essentially, that can engage in a conversation, can continue a conversation. It can detect the topic and context of the conversation and generate text in that setting, meaning that it can answer follow-up questions. It can continue generating text within the same context of the conversation. And essentially what it generates is the capability of generating essays, which makes it quite peculiar. What we have right now, which was released in last November 2022, is a pilot free version of it that's accessible. It's still being trained. So that's why it's a pilot version. More recently, in February, they released a subscription based version of it called ChatGPT Plus. And again, within the past few days, I've heard that they have released an API, which essentially allows the companies and businesses to connect to ChatGPT and be able to use it as part of their website, their apps. And there are already several businesses that they are doing this, like Instacart, Shopify, Quizlet, Snapchat. I've heard that they are implementing it, or they have implemented on their social network. It has, since its release, the free version, it has grown significantly in popularity. Right now, it's estimated to have about 100 million users per month, which is probably the fastest growing application, given that it is just released a few months ago.
Wow, that's certainly quite the pretty astronomical growth in that short of a time period. Hamed, I guess one big question before we kind of get into some more specifics about the product itself is who owns it, who created it, and are there concerns around that, or is it less concerning than, say, TikTok, for example?
So ChatGPT was created by and is owned by a company called OpenAI. It's an American company based in San Francisco. OpenAI itself was founded by a group of tech entrepreneurs, including Elon Musk and its current CEO, Sam Altman, back in 2015. It was founded as a non-profit AI lab research, as AI research lab, and it's called OpenAI Incorporated or Inc. The idea underlying it was to democratize AI, to make the AI more vastly adopted by the citizens and the ordinary citizens, the non-tech people. And just one clarification, Elon Musk resigned from the board in 2018 because of the potential conflict of interest that there was, because Tesla is also working on AI applications. In 2019, OpenAI actually started a subsidiary, which is for profit, called OpenAI LP, to attract venture capital investment and I think provide some shares to their employees. And compared to TikTok, and I know that we have talked about TikTok before, it's a fundamentally different situation here. The privacy concern that is about TikTok, given the amount of information it collects and so on, at least right now, it doesn't exist For ChatGPT, it's a fundamentally different type of system. It's not an app that you install it so far on your phone, and it's very different than social media that you interact and provide a lot of behavioral information. That's one. Number two is that one problem with the TikTok, one challenge with the TikTok was that it's a Chinese company. And there's a history there with respect to the government of China collecting data, etc., and the privacy concerns there, which does not apply here, given that OpenAI is an American company, and it is mainly operated as I know that it has that for-profit subsidiary, and there is discussion around it, but it is operated as a company that profit is not its main purpose, rather than it's democratizing the AI.
Okay, so I guess less concern about ownership here, but back to the product itself. Now, you mentioned that its essay writing abilities seem to be attracting a lot of its viewers or users in this case. How good is it? And you mentioned that it's training or it assimilates information. Is it getting better and better at perhaps writing essays?
Yes, I mean, the way it works, how good it is probably one of the state-of-art system it's in on generation. Or ChatGPT belongs to a type of AI models known as large language models. And these large language models, these are AI models, neural network models, or deep learning models, that they are trained on a vast amount of text. And essentially, the idea is that it stores the word knowledge, whatever that text generates, within its model, and then it can generate text based on that knowledge base. Right? That's the idea. That's the type or the generation it belongs to. What ChatGPT does essentially is that to describe it, there are a lot of technical details, but to describe it is relatively simple. It generates one token, and token can be a part of a word at time. So at each time, it's essentially generating a token. A token can be a part, a few letters of a word. And because of that, actually, it has generated some new words when it is responding to text or prompts. And the way it does it, it has this ultimate overall goal of continuing the conversation, continuing the text. So depending on the text that is there, it generates a new token, right, to add to it and to continue the conversation and text. And to do that, it uses its knowledge base. So it has been trained on a vast amount of text on the internet. It is billions of pages of text, from the digital books to websites, forums, social media posts, speeches, videos, YouTube videos, etc., videos that are online, available online. It has been trained on all of those. And based on that, it essentially generates these tokens. Now, what it does, there are several considerations in its design, which makes it more natural. First of all, it tries to do it in a reasonable way. And by reasonable way, I mean from the user perspective, that what would a user, a person, expect a human would say in response to that question, or to that prompt, right? That's essentially the basis that is compared with. So it generates the text or tokens with that goal in mind. And at each step, when it tries to generate this token, it has a set of tokens. It calculates a set of tokens based on its knowledge base, based on that training of billions of pages of text. It generates a set of possible tokens with a higher probability of happening after whatever text or has been sort of has exist. For example, if you ask a question, based on that question, what would be the first token, right, that should be provided, right, in response to this question to continue the conversation? That's what I mean. So there's a set of them with the probability, and it picks one of those tokens, right, to sort of generate the words. One thing that is quite interesting about it is that if every time it goes and picks the token with the highest probability, then it would make the language quite too crisp and less human-like, because for every prompt, there's going to be a very similar answer, but that's not the case about ChatGPT. If you ask the same question, you will see that it provides different answers every time. And one reason for that is that it has a controlled randomness implemented in it, that every time that it's selecting a token from a set of more probable tokens, it randomly select one of those. It's a controlled randomness. They call it temperature parameter. And based on some empirical evidence. They found they set a value for this randomness that is a better value to make the essays more interesting. And because of that, you have this creativity in the text that is being generated. So every time you ask a question, right, the language that you see, what it generates is going to be a little bit different. And that comes partly from this randomness. It's selecting the tokens that it has to generate. As part of explaining, because since we're talking about the mechanisms, so one question can be where all these words and tokens come from. How does it know which set of tokens it should pick, or which one, what is the probability of it? That goes back to essentially the training of it. A little bit of a history. ChatGPT is essentially built based on a number of earlier versions of this system that were released, I think, starting 2018. So there was a GPT-1 that OpenAI released in 2018, I believe. GPT-2 that was released in 2019, and then GPT-3 that was released in 2020. And ChatGPT is essentially a fine-tuned version of GPT-3. The CEO calls it GPT 3.5 Turbo, something like that. Now, and the difference between those is essentially the training that has been provided. At the first step, it has an AI model, a neural net model, an AI model that was trained on billions of pages of text from the internet. So essentially it went through them and tried to detect the context, the language, that which word comes after which word in what context. So these are all of the things that have learned, that the AI model has learned. And then after that, it went through a process of fine-tuning, reinforced learning, meaning that it started sort of generating the text, and the actual humans, right, provided feedback to it based on how good of a chatbot it is, right, whether the text that's being generated is meaningful or not, and whether it is something that is considered human-like or not. And that's what I meant by sort of a reasonable conversation. And it's still, this free version that is out there is still doing that. That's why you can upvote and downvote whatever text it generates. It gets the feedback, and it's still getting better and better.
So essentially, it goes through a process of likelihood and probabilities and kind of filters down from there based on behavioral science. I guess from a broader perspective here, Ahmed, what does ChatGPT mean for the development of both artificial intelligence and technology as a whole? What does this mean for this space?
That's a great question, and we are still at very early days of this. It's going, and we have to see its potentials and definitely risk as well. So, but there are certain things that we can imagine and we are seeing already. First thing is that ChatGPT probably is the best AI model that can create a reasonable model of the human language. It generates a reasonable way of sort of speaking or generating text, which is very human-like. And that means that the AI system, for the AI systems, they are getting into more complex human-type tasks, which is the laws of language and the laws of cognition and thinking. So I think with that and this approach, we can expect to see more of the system getting into more complex human tasks, or which is fundamental. It's going to change a lot of things, right? If AI has been an issue, whether in terms of the potentials or in terms of the downsides, to replace humans in certain activities and tasks, right? That is going to sort of now expand. There are several businesses that are already implementing ChatGPT and this type of AI models in their system, in their websites and apps. Instacart, for instance, and Shopify too. They are creating some shopping assistant, which they can go beyond the simple chatbots, right? You can provide whatever criteria you have in mind in terms of what is that you want to buy for a grocery, for example, and then it can get into conversation and sort of within that context, right, provide suggestions. Snapchat has done that in terms of an AI on their social network. And in general, any interactive technology system, all right, which is a large set of the systems that we use, from the social media to the personal assistants like Alexa, Siri, this type of system, like forums, even the automated call systems that essentially is a robot answering your call. We're going to see a significant difference because now we have this system that can understand the text and also generate a very human-like language. So these are going to be a major positive implications, right? With that, as any technology comes, the risks too. So then there are a lot of concerns already within the education sector, and within CSU a few days ago. Actually, we had a seminar on that. There is a concern that there can be malpractices of ChatGPT for the purpose of plagiarism and cheating and those sort of things, and how, given that the language that's being generated is very human-like, how it should be detected, how it should be sort of mitigated. There was in the news, there was a professor in Wharton School in University of Pennsylvania that it actually gave an MBA exam to ChatGPT, and ChatGPT could pass the exam, which essentially tells you about the concern that we can have in this regard. With respect to cybersecurity, there are concerns. One of the effective cybersecurity threats has been the phishing attacks, and the phishing attacks try to mimic humans and try to mimic a trusted person, to mimic the language, to mimic the communication, to victimize the people. And now with the ChatGPT, right, the attackers have a very strong tool at their disposition. Again, that becomes a concern. One concern about ChatGPT, which also is based on the responses that the language has created, is the false information. I personally had an experience with that. I was testing it a few weeks ago on an area of my research. I asked ChatGPT to show me some academic papers. It generated a list of citations for me, which based on title, very relevant, and it has everything, the full citation. None of those papers were real. I checked those papers, none of them existed out there. And some of them, they went back to like 2012, but there was no such a paper with the author and sort of all the details. That talks about, and that's the characteristic of its sort of generative nature, that it generates text. That with that, it can create false information. One thing that is concerning about that is that it's very difficult to identify, to detect that this is a false information. And it becomes even more difficult to convince people who believed it that this is false information. And we already have concerns, and we know stories about how false information can affect our elections and our public health and so on during COVID-19 and etc. Another concern with that has been that how it should be controlled. Microsoft has been using it in its in search engine Bing, and they had to sort of put some limits on it because it can be tricked into generating some violent and sexual content. Again, because of that generative nature of it. All right, that's another concern. Overall, it seems that it's a new reality. It's significantly different from what we are used to in terms of the chatbots and how much they can mimic the human language. And I think our institutions, our laws and regulations needs to adapt to it, and they need time to consider how they can use its potential and also be able to mitigate its risk, because it does also present significant risk.
Absolutely. Well, it's kind of the Wild West for ChatGPT, as you mentioned, a lot of promise, also the potential for a lot of real concerns, plagiarism, influence in ways we don't want it. But Hamed Saremi, we really appreciate a few minutes of your time here and explaining what ChatGPT is, what it can do, and maybe what it can't do, and also how it may look in the future. But thanks so much for joining us here on 90s Plus and giving us some of your insight here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Chris.